I don't scare easily. Comes with the territory, I suppose. As a paranormal investigator, I've spent years chasing shadows, debunking myths, and occasionally stumbling upon things that defy explanation. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the forgotten research facility buried deep in the forest. It was January 29th, 2025, a cold Wednesday morning, the kind of cold that bites through your coat and settles in your bones. The facility had been abandoned for decades, its purpose long erased from official records. Rumors swirled about unethical experiments and mysterious disappearances, but no one seemed to know the full story. That's where I came in. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, seeker of the inexplicable. The drive to the site was uneventful, save for the oppressive silence of the forest. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. The facility loomed ahead, a hulking relic of concrete and steel, its windows shattered like jagged teeth. Vines clawed up its walls as if nature itself was trying to swallow it whole. I parked my car at the edge of the clearing and stepped out, my breath fogging in the icy air. The forest seemed to hold its breath as I approached the building, my equipment bag slung over one shoulder. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed down the empty halls. Inside, it was as though time had stopped. Desks were still cluttered with papers yellowed by age, coffee mugs sat half full and fossilized on counters, a calendar on the wall read March 1983. The air was thick with dust and something else, something heavier, almost tangible. I set up my equipment in what appeared to be a central lab. EMF detectors hummed softly as I unpacked my thermal camera and audio recorder. My goal was simple: document any residual energy or phenomena tied to this place's dark history. But from the moment I stepped inside, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical investigation. The first sign came almost immediately: a cold draft that swept through the room despite there being no open windows or doors. It wasn't just cold, it was biting, like icy fingers brushing against my skin. "All right," I muttered under my breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Let's see what you've got." I turned on my audio recorder and began asking questions, my voice echoing faintly in the cavernous space. "Is anyone here? Can you give me a sign?" For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, bang! A loud crash came from somewhere deeper in the facility. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite myself. No answer. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway lined with rusting lockers and peeling paint. The air grew colder with each step, and an oppressive weight seemed to press down on me, making it harder to breathe. At the end of the hall was a door marked Cold Storage. It hung slightly ajar, revealing an impenetrable darkness beyond. My flashlight flickered as I pushed it open. The room was massive, a walk-in freezer lined with rows of metal shelves now empty except for a few broken jars and scattered papers. But it wasn't what I saw that made me freeze. It was what I felt. The atmosphere was thick with something indescribable, like static electricity mixed with raw emotion. And then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. But they grew louder, more distinct, a cacophony of voices overlapping in anguish. "Help us. Remember. Don't leave." I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could move further, something slammed into me from behind, a force so strong it sent me sprawling to the ground. My flashlight skittered across the floor and went out. In total darkness now, I scrambled to find it, while those voices swirled around me like a storm. When I finally managed to get my flashlight working again, I found myself staring at something that made my blood run cold. Handprints smeared across the frosted walls, dozens of them, pressed into the ice as though people had been clawing to get out. And then, they moved. One by one, those frozen handprints began sliding down toward me as if whatever had left them was still there, still reaching out for help or vengeance or both. I bolted from that room faster than I thought possible, heart hammering in my chest. But no matter how far I ran or how many turns I took through those labyrinthine halls, it felt like something was following me. Something unseen but undeniably present. Back in what passed for safety, the main lab, I tried to collect myself and review my footage. But when I played back the audio recording from earlier, there were voices, clear as day. "You shouldn't be here," one said. a man's voice laced with anger. "She needs to know," another countered, a woman's voice trembling with desperation. And then came a third voice, low and guttural and filled with malice. "They are mine." The lights flickered violently as that last voice echoed through my headphones, and then everything went dark. When they came back on seconds later, or maybe minutes, time felt slippery. I wasn't alone anymore. Figures stood around me, translucent but unmistakably human. Men and women in lab coats, children clutching stuffed animals, even what looked like soldiers armed with rifles, all staring at me with hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "You have to remember," one of them said, a young woman whose face was half obscured by burns. "If you forget us, we'll disappear." "I don't understand," I stammered, backing away until my back hit a wall. "The experiments," she whispered. "They trapped us here, our energy, our souls." Before I could respond, or even fully process what she'd said, the figures began to dissolve into wisps of light that swirled together into an orb hovering inches above the floor. And then it spoke, not in words but directly into my mind, images flashing before my eyes faster than I could comprehend, scenes of pain and fear and betrayal, memories not my own but somehow deeply familiar. Because they were mine too. Or rather, they would be someday if history repeated itself. That's when it hit me, the horrifying truth about this place. It wasn't just preserving their consciousness, it was feeding off it, waiting for new lives like mine, connected by bloodlines destined always return here unwittingly generation after generation. And now, it wanted me to join them forever, trapped within its endless hunger. I've always been fascinated by the tangled roots of family trees, the way they intertwine and sometimes strangle each other in the process. But I never expected my own genealogical research to lead me down such a dark and twisted path. It all started with a dusty old photograph I found in my grandmother's attic. A sepia-toned image of a farmhouse, nestled deep in what looked like an impenetrable forest. On the back, in faded ink, was scrawled a single word, Hinterkaifeck. The name sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. It felt like a whisper from the past, a secret trying to claw its way into the present. I had to know more. My search led me to a remote corner of Bavaria, to a forest that seemed to swallow all light and sound. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, ready to snatch unwary travelers. As I drove deeper into the woods, my GPS sputtered and died, leaving me alone with nothing but my instincts and the growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. I found what remained of the Hinterkaifeck farmstead just as the sun was beginning to set. The old house was little more than a pile of rotting timber and crumbling stone, but it still held an air of menace. The forest had reclaimed much of the land, but it felt less like nature healing and more like the woods were trying to hide something. As I stepped out of my car, the silence hit me like a physical force. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. It was as if all life had been sucked out of this place, leaving behind nothing but memories and shadows. I approached the ruins cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step felt like I was walking deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The old floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and I could have sworn I heard whispers carried on the wind. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whirled around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the endless sea of trees and the growing darkness. "Get a grip, Anna," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But as I turned back to the house, I froze. There, in what must have been a window once upon a time, stood a figure. It was there for just a moment, a silhouette against the deepening twilight before vanishing like smoke. My rational mind tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew. Something was here with me, something old and angry and patient. I spent the night in my car, too terrified to leave, but too stubborn or foolish to abandon my search. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by nightmares of axes and screams and dark figures moving through the trees. When dawn finally broke, I forced myself to return to the farmstead. In the harsh light of day, it looked almost ordinary, just another abandoned building slowly being reclaimed by nature. But the feeling of wrongness lingered, like a bad taste I couldn't wash out of my mouth. I spent hours combing through the ruins, looking for any clue that might connect this place to my family history. As the day wore on, I began to piece together a horrifying story. The Hinterkaifeck murders, an entire family brutally slaughtered in 1922, the killer never found. But that was just the beginning. The more I dug, the more I uncovered a pattern of violence stretching back centuries. Whispers of witchcraft, of dark rituals performed in the depths of the forest, and always, the same names appearing again and again in the records. Names I recognized from my own family tree. As night fell once more, I knew I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to put as much distance between myself and this cursed place as possible. But I couldn't. I was too close to the truth. Too close to understanding the weight of the secret I'd unwittingly carried my entire life. I made my way to the barn, where the worst of the killings had taken place. The air inside was thick and oppressive, heavy with the memory of long-ago violence. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing centuries of graffiti, pleas for forgiveness, warnings to stay away, desperate attempts to ward off evil. And then I saw it. A symbol carved into one of the beams, so old it was almost worn away. But I recognized it immediately. The same symbol that appeared on a locket my mother always wore. The one she told me had been passed down through generations of women in our family. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just connected to this place. I was bound to it. Blood of my blood had spilled here, both victim and perpetrator. The forest had been waiting for me, for this moment, for nearly 100 years. A sound behind me made me spin around, my heart leaping into my throat. There in the doorway of the barn stood a figure, not quite human, not quite animal. Its form seemed to shift and change in the wavering beam of my flashlight. But its eyes, God, its eyes were fixed on me with a hunger that made my soul shrivel. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, though I feared I already knew the answer. The thing's mouth opened in a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. When it spoke, its voice was like rustling leaves and cracking bones. "We are the forest," it hissed. "We are vengeance, we are justice, and you, little one, are the last." I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. But no matter how fast I moved, I could feel it right behind me, its hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the tree line, my lungs burning, and saw my car just ahead. Safety. Escape. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Just as I wrenched the door open, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. Icy cold, with fingers like twigs, it spun me around. I found myself face to face with the thing from the barn, its features now a twisted mix of every face I'd seen in my family albums. "You cannot escape us," it growled. "The sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation." I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow. But it never came. Instead, I felt something being pressed into my hand. When I dared to look, I saw it was an old, rusted key. The creature's form was already beginning to fade, melting back into the shadows of the forest. But its voice lingered, carried on the wind. "The cycle ends with you, Anna. Choose wisely." I stood there for what felt like hours, the key burning in my palm like a brand. The weight of generations pressed down on me, a legacy of violence and secrets and unresolved pain. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made my choice. I wouldn't run from this. I wouldn't hide. Whatever dark history lay buried in these woods, whatever curse had been placed on my bloodline, it was time to face it head on. I turned back toward the farmstead, key in hand, ready to unlock whatever terrible truth awaited me. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting to see if I would be the one to finally break the cycle or become just another link in this chain of horrors. As I approached the old house once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that every step was bringing me closer to my destiny, and perhaps to the destiny of all those who had come before me. The key felt heavier with each passing moment, a tangible reminder of the choice that lay before me. The door to the farmhouse creaked open at my touch, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the weight of unspoken secrets. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling wallpaper and broken furniture, the sad remnants of lives long since ended. In the center of what must have once been the living room stood an old, ornate chest. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols that matched the one I'd seen in the barn, the one on my mother's locket. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the source of the curse. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like breaking bones, and the lid slowly creaked open. Inside lay a book, its cover made of what looked disturbingly like human skin. And beside it, a knife with a blade that seemed to drink in the light. As I reached for the book, a voice whispered in my ear, so close I could feel its cold breath on my skin. "Choose wisely, Anna. Break the cycle, or complete it." I realized then that the true horror wasn't in the forest, or in some supernatural entity seeking vengeance. It was in the choices we make, the legacies we create, and the darkness that can live within our own hearts. With a deep breath, I made my choice. And as I did, I felt the weight of generations lift from my shoulders. Whether I had broken the curse or merely shifted its form, I couldn't say. But I knew that from this moment on, my path, and the path of my family, would never be the same. As I left the farmhouse for the last time, the forest seemed different. Still dark, still ancient, but no longer menacing. It watched me go with the patient eyes of a guardian, knowing that someday, somehow, I would return. And when I do, I'll be ready to face whatever waits for me in the shadows of Hinterkaifeck Woods. It was January 29th, 2025. A bitter Wednesday night. I remember the date because it was the kind of cold that etches itself into your bones, the kind you don't forget. The logging camp in Whisper Pines was as remote as it gets, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by towering evergreens that seemed to press in closer every night. I'd been working night shifts for years, but something about this place felt different, wrong, even. The others didn't talk much about it, but you could see it in their eyes. The unease, the way they avoided looking out into the forest after dark, like they were afraid of what might look back. I wasn't one to spook easily. Years in this line of work had hardened me, both my body and my mind. But that night, as I trudged through the snow toward the machinery shed, flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It started small, a faint crunch of snow behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath, and swung the flashlight around. Nothing but trees and shadows. The wind rustled through the branches above, whispering secrets I couldn't quite catch. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered to myself, shaking off the creeping paranoia. But then I heard it, a voice. Faint at first, carried on the wind like a ghostly echo. "Jake." I froze. My heart thudded against my ribs as I strained to listen. "Jake, help me." The voice was unmistakable. It was Sam's voice, my brother's voice. The problem? Sam had been dead for 3 years. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. Who would believe me? A grown man hearing his dead brother calling from the woods. They'd laugh me out of camp, or worse, think I'd lost my mind. But the voice kept coming back. Night after night, always just beyond the tree line, just far enough to make me question if I'd really heard it at all. "Jake, come find me." It sounded so real, so desperate, like he was in pain. I started losing sleep over it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sam's face, pale and hollow-eyed like he looked in his casket, and heard his voice echoing in my head. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if it was real, or if I was just going crazy. It was 3 a.m., and the camp was silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional creak of snow-laden branches. Armed with nothing but my flashlight and a growing sense of dread, I stepped into the forest. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their skeletal branches clawing at the starless sky. My boots crunched through the snow as I followed the sound of Sam's voice deeper into the woods. "Jake, this way." Every time I thought I was getting closer, the voice seemed to move farther away, always just out of reach. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. "Damn it," I hissed, smacking it against my palm until it sputtered back to life. That's when I saw it, a shadow darting between the trees up ahead. It was quick, almost too quick to be human. "Who's there?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. No answer. just silence so thick it pressed against my ears like cotton. Then came the footsteps, soft at first but growing louder, closer. My pulse quickened as I swung the flashlight around wildly, its beam slicing through the darkness. A figure emerged from behind a tree, a man with Sam's face and hollow eyes that stared straight through me. "Jake," he rasped, his voice cracked and broken like an old record skipping on repeat. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "You're not real," I whispered, more to myself than to him. But he just smiled, a slow, unnatural curl of his lips that sent ice down my spine, and stepped closer. I don't remember running back to camp. It's all a blur of panic and adrenaline. When I finally burst into the bunkhouse, gasping for breath and covered in sweat despite the freezing cold, no one believed me. "You've been working too many nights," one of them said with a chuckle. "Get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easy after that. Not with Sam's face burned into my mind and his voice still echoing in my ears. The next night was worse. The voice didn't just call from the woods anymore. It came from inside the camp itself. Outside my window, down empty hallways, even from behind closed doors where no one should have been. And then people started disappearing. First it was Mike, the new guy who always kept to himself. Then Tom and Eddie went missing on their shift without a trace. No footprints leading away from camp. No signs of struggle, just gone. Panic spread like wildfire among us. Some packed up and left without a word. Others stayed but refused to work nights anymore. Not that it mattered. Day or night didn't seem to make much difference anymore. Whisper Pines had swallowed them whole either way. By now, there were only 3 of us left. Me, Frank, the grizzled old-timer who'd been logging longer than anyone else here, and Danny, the kid barely out of high school who looked like he might piss himself any second now. Not that I blamed him. We decided we couldn't stay another night, not with whatever this thing was picking us off one by one, but leaving wasn't going to be easy either. Not without knowing what we were up against first. So we set traps around camp, rigged up makeshift alarms using tin cans strung together with fishing line, even took turns keeping watch while armed with axes and flashlights. But none of that mattered when it finally showed itself. It came just before dawn, a low guttural growl followed by heavy footfalls crunching through snow outside our bunkhouse door. Frank grabbed his axe while Danny whimpered quietly behind him. Meanwhile, I held onto my flashlight tighter than ever before. When suddenly, the door burst open revealing, not Sam, but something far worse wearing his face. Its body twisted unnaturally long limbs ending sharp claws dripping blood like sap. Before anyone could react, it lunged forward, grabbing Frank, dragging him screaming into the darkness, leaving only me and Danny alone facing pure evil.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.